Hey, everybody. I think I'm going to get started. Thank you all for making it here today for what I hope might be the most provocatively titled talk of the conference, of the summit. Um, I mean, it got you here, so I appreciate that and for you taking a chance on this. And the reason for the title, Open Source as a Sewer, is because I'd like us to think a little bit about what the things are that make up our modern world. We're here, we're lucky to be here on beautiful days in Amsterdam. And have you thought a little bit about who built Amsterdam's sewage system that is beneath our feet? Who's keeping it running? What about the trains and the tram tracks that you rode to get here today, or even the roads or the electricity grids that are powering everything? In the end, it's the government, or rather we also as citizens and residents, we pay for these things with our taxes. But when we ask ourselves these same questions about open source software, about those foundational components that underpin our world's digital infrastructure, the answer is often very different. It's Daniel for curl, who spoke yesterday, Piotr, Christian, and Volkan for log4j, a small team that's revitalizing the Fortran language, Sarah, who works on Nominatim's geocoding, Richard at the Yocto project, and countless other maintainers. To do this, I want to take a little bit of a closer look at the history of public water infrastructure and then make some lateral analogies, which I find myself always being enlightened by comparing things like that. So this part is a little bit interactive and a little bit personal. Who here took a shower this morning or last night? Thank you so much. I think everybody really appreciates it. I consider it one of the marvels, the greatest marvels of modernity, that I can turn on a faucet and water comes out that I can drink, that I can cook with, or shower with. But things weren't always this way, and it took a lot of people and a lot of money to get things to where they are today, much to the case that we often take these things for granted now. So if you were in Berlin, for example, where I live on New Year's Eve, you would have experienced in several districts that they were completely without water, and that some streets actually in the northern district of Wedding were flooded. And that's actually because a 100-year-old gray cast iron pipe had broken. Initially, some people speculated that it was due to the wild fireworks that are always happening in Berlin on New Year's Eve. But actually, later, the water utility confirmed that it was simple wear and tear. So we'll come back to the question of wear and tear a little bit later, but for now, can you imagine building something that would last 100 years? You know, like this gray cast iron pipe. So this is now about a little bit about London, and I have a part about Amsterdam, and then we'll talk a little bit about Berlin. But one thing that I started looking into when I came up with the idea for this talk is, how did modern sewage systems get started? So this is a picture from London's very beautiful Crossness pumping station. You can actually visit it. It's a tourist attraction, but only on certain days, certain months, certain times. But it was built because in the case of London, in the, I think it was the mid-1800s, London had a growing population. It was reaching something around 2.5 million people. And the sort of ad hoc system of wells, of water pumps, of cesspits, over 200,000 cesspits, and latrine bucket carriers, that's a new term that I learned. They removed what was called night soil, if you can imagine, so not fun stuff that you produce overnight, from your home. And when I was reading about this, I thought you might call these latrine bucket carriers the proprietary waste removal services of their time. So this whole system of cesspits, water pumps, wells was really reaching its limits. And by that, I mean, we mean literally it often did overflow. And that's because of the rise of indoor plumbing for the wealthy and the middle class was leading to waste, so sewage, being flushed directly into waterways and rivers, like in London, the Thames. And as you can imagine, this resulted in things like cholera epidemics. So tens of thousands of people died in the 1830s, the 1840s, and 1850s. This was not just a problem in London, but actually in most cities of the era. Lots of people made different plans, but cost was always an issue. But then, as things often do, they came to a head in what is called the Great Sink of 1858. So in London, it was a very, very hot and dry summer. So instead of the sewage being carried out to sea, once it sort of flowed into the river, it stuck around, staying in the river and even collected near Parliament. So, once it affects people who are in charge of the money, sometimes things happen. So they authorized the project. These plans that have been made to develop water and sewage systems for London, and the civil engineer Joseph Bazalgette led this, and it was finished in 1875 for a cost of just £6.5 million. So that was the beginning of the sewage system in London, and also of this beautiful pumping station, which I wanted to show you all. So it looks a little bit different in Amsterdam, and when I was looking into this, I was wondering why that was and how it all came to be. So Amsterdam, because of the canal system, is a little bit different. Here in the 16th and 17th century, the canals were like way too easy for people to dump their sewage into. So as you can imagine, it was real fun. It was known as a really stinky place. And the way that they dealt with it is a person named Johannes Hudde developed a system of, I think they're called sluices, for flushing the canals. And I think that was in 1682 for like getting the sewage out of those areas. In 1847, so a little less than 200 years later, Samuel Sarfati started a collection service for feces so that they would not end up directly in the canals. It's a very fun business model. In 1854, Amsterdam started connecting tap water into people's homes. And 1879, the steam-powered pump station, I can't pronounce this right, Gemal-Zeeburg was built, and that actually flushed the city with clean water from the Southern Sea. So all sorts of ways of dealing not with the source of the problem, but actually being like, how are we just going to clear things out, flush the canals, and nobody was really thinking about stopping or there was no way to figure out how to stop the emptying of sewage into the canal system. So finally, in 1921, which is much later than in London and what we'll talk about briefly in Berlin, the first wastewater treatment and the first separated sewer was built. And this next bit really surprised me. The last house to quit discharging directly into the canals only did so in December of 1987. So, sometimes things take a long time to change. By the way, I'm sure nobody is thinking about this after I've told these stories, but swimming in the canals is illegal. Do not do it. Do not jump in the canals. You'll get fined like 140 euros or something like that. Yeah. Oh, and another lovely thing that I learned was that Amsterdam is celebrating its 750th birthday this year. So that you'll see some of the signs and banners outside, and they are putting new manhole covers onto the sewage system. I haven't actually spotted one myself. This is like a picture from the internet, but keep an eye out. It's always fun to think about infrastructure when you're walking around. So now for a brief trip to Berlin. So around the time that we were talking about with London in the 1850s, in the 19th century, Berlin's population was growing not as large as London, but around 500,000. And Berlin was one of the last European capitals to construct a water supply system. They started in 1852. It cost about $1.5 million. And then the sewage system they started building that in 1873, headed by a person named James Hobrecht. So this freshwater system was actually built by an English company led by Charles Fox and Thomas Russell Crampton. Berlin's gasworks were also all built by the English, and I thought that was an interesting tidbit about how infrastructure expertise, even back then, was not limited by national borders. And since then, various government-owned companies have been in charge of Berlin's water and sewage infrastructure. Today, they provide around 4 million residents with clean water and flushing toilets. Another thing I'm very grateful for. So we talk about software eating the world, and also open source software eating software itself even faster. But in the 19th century, the culprit was toilets. So as I talked about how people were getting flushing toilets, and that was putting literal pressure on the system that was not designed for flushing toilets. And so I think there's a little bit of you can think about what else is putting pressure on an open source software ecosystem at the moment. There's some interesting parallels, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So I didn't only want to talk about toilets today, although I love talking about water infrastructure. There's many kinds of public infrastructure works. A lot of them were actually sort of pioneered and developed in the 18th and 19th century. Here's a picture from Berlin where the city planner is memorialized on a bridge, another piece of physical infrastructure. I was looking into London's Underground Rail, which first opened in 1868, and then they electrified it in the 1880s, and the core was completed in the early 20th century. Similarly, Berlin's subway system dates to 1880. The construction began right before the turn of the century, and the first line, the U1, opened in 1902. The U.S. highway systems are actually also from a little bit later, but just thinking about how much we spend on these kinds of infrastructure, the U.S. highway system cost $114 billion in the time that it was built. And in today's dollars, that would be $618 billion. So just thinking about, buy early. Andrew Carnegie, who is a steel magnate, he and his foundation put around $56 million into building 2,509 public libraries. 1,681 of those were built in the United States. So I just wanted to stretch our imaginations a little bit to think beyond really just physical roads, bridges, sewers, but also things like schools, libraries, and other kinds of infrastructure. So all those kinds of public infrastructure have grown into a system of actors who build Amsterdam's sewage system below our feet, who keeps it running. I mean, here, I'm sorry if I get anything wrong, but I was looking into how things work in the Netherlands. There's actually very nerdy, exciting things happening with laws regulating water infrastructure in the Netherlands. They are no longer allowed to be privatized companies, although I then read that they're like outsourcing many functions. So in the end, it's kind of like a big, complicated situation anyway. But I think WaterNet is in Amsterdam. They run the water system here, both freshwater and sewage. I think Tenet is the electricity grid. ProRail is the rail infrastructure. But I think GVB is the local public transit agency. And of course, you have every country is different, but you have different ministries and different government units responsible for things like water infrastructure, but also education systems. Or I think AEB is the water treatment facility or water treatment plant. And I think they also produce gas because when you have water like that, it produces natural gas. Yeah. So the big question is, in the end, who's behind all of these things? And through various, systems, whether it's holding companies or public commissions, it is the government that is responsible for all these kinds of actors who keep our public infrastructure working. But when we ask ourselves these questions around open source software, the answer is really, really different. So it's not agencies, it's not companies, not as much. It's really when we look at the foundational components that underpin our world's digital infrastructure, it's, again, Daniel for curl, the folks at Log4j, all these folks whose name I've already said in the beginning, and lots of other. This is not a complete list, obviously, and I also want to say that I've oversimplified because can't fit everybody on a slide. There's often teams, and not just single maintainers working on these things. And it's only a partial snapshot of the vast and complex ecosystem of critical software components that I've run into while working at Germany's sovereign tech agency. But just to contrast, I think, I had a chance to meet a bunch of these folks at a conference earlier this year at FOSS Backstage, and I force them to take photos. So here we have Tobias, who works on GNOME, going then to the middle, Florian on Open Web Docs, Jan, who is a Sovereign Tech Fellow and working on, I think it's Cyclone, DX, SBOM structures, Neil, who works at Sequoia PGP, Hugo, who's a release manager for Python, and then Jarek, who's at Apache Airflow. So these are just some of the faces, not logos of corporations, but actual people who are doing all of this digital infrastructure maintenance and making sure that it continues to work. So I think I will just gloss over this very quickly because I'm preaching to the choir here. But in an age and in societies that are really relying on software for everything, when governments, private companies, organizations, and individuals depend on digital systems, all of these foundations are really terrifyingly precarious. And the increased pressure on the ecosystem from increasing digitalization. I was once told when I used that word in a talk that clearly I live in Germany because only people in Germany talk about digitalization these days. But anyway, we all use software anywhere. So you can pick your toilet analogy, but whether it's machine learning or every company needing its own app, all of these developments are an additional weight on top of these existing building blocks. And to sort of go back to the sewage thing, all of that is trickling down or gushing down onto individual maintainers, dealing with problems and maintenance and updates and resolving issues and vulnerabilities. So many other speakers probably have, or you've seen lots of discussions about this, but many projects have only one maintainer and would really consider themselves lucky if there are two. So what do we do? And I think what we are doing at the Sovereign Tech Agency and what we're hoping for is that we can work towards having the right organizations and key decision makers recognizing this situation, and that we can also pay the right people to do the critical work of caring for and securing these systems, just like we do in the rest of the social or the digital, the rest of the physical infrastructure that we take for granted these days, from sewage to roads and bridges and train tracks. So one, I guess, nice thing, and I also really like Picard tips, that maintenance of existing systems is just as important of building existing capabilities, is that this ecosystem already exists. We don't have to reinvent it. We don't have to rebuild it. We're already all using it and benefiting from it. And that's something that I try to remind myself to be grateful for, and think about that and keep that in mind when we talk about how we can improve and sustain and strengthen this system. So this is a picture from Dresden, where I think earlier this year, or maybe it was late last year, a bridge cracked, unfortunately. And that's it was quite a big story, but it's a little unfair because what I'm going to say is that generally governments are quite good at maintenance, so much so that we actually take it for granted until something goes wrong. And whether it's making sure that medicines are safe, that water is clean, that the electricity grid is in balance, or that bridges are in repair, we generally, and I use that word also pretty carefully, can rely on public agencies and institutions to be on the ball, whether it's here in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Berlin where I live, or in the US where I grew up. Although I feel like I need to change that line with things going on in the US, a bit stressful. For digital infrastructure, though, for the open technologies used in everything from space probes to smartphones, we're leaning really, really hard on the work of individuals or small groups of volunteers. And I think Nadia Ekbal in her book Roads and Bridges put this really, really well, which is to say, as the world blazes ahead into a modern age of startups, code, and technology, infrastructure continues to lag behind. The cracks in the foundation are not obvious right now, but they are widening. And yeah. So my thesis, or I guess the point of all this, thank you all for making it here so far, is that digital infrastructure in the public interest, just as governments are in charge of education, clean water, transportation, and sewers, so too can they also invest in digital infrastructure in the critical open source in the public interest. And I've been asking myself, just as many countries made the transition from, for example, toll roads where you pay to go on them, to public roads, is it also possible for governments and nation states to help secure the public digital commons without running roughshod over the sprawling organic ecosystem of FOSS communities and contributors who created it? I mean, I hope so, but I'm also asking you all to think about this. And how do we do this? The ways that you build a sewage system or keep air travel safe are not the same how you commission software maintenance, especially not on the sprawling web of critical open source infrastructure. With thousands of maintainers, of hobbyists, semi-professionals, and professional contributors, it's really messy. How do you even identify the people with the knowledge and the experience to keep this work going? So when I am confronted with this, and my colleagues who are also, some of them are here in the audience, were confronted with this in our day-to-day work, I would like to stretch this metaphor and say I kind of imagine it's like wrapping string around these individual strands of a spider's web. We try, but there's always impact. And sometimes it's for the good, and sometimes we're not sure what will happen next. So beyond that, there's a question of what this attention and what public money will do to technologies and communities. I don't think it's always, or definitely won't be easy, but as we've established in the beginning, it's definitely worth it, and it's also necessary. And so this wouldn't be a talk without me presenting that to do a thing that it's also helpful to name it, which is why we have this very long German term, digitale Daseinsvorsorge, something we're trying to establish as an idea. And it's the notion that in the same way that governments are in charge of providing all these different services and infrastructure, from water to education to transportation in the public interest, they can also invest and maintain critical and essential open source. So that's what we're working on today. I don't want to heard a little bit about us possibly. I'm also happy to chat about it afterwards. But I really want to make the case that modern societies should consider open digital infrastructure and those services as much their responsibility as physical infrastructure. And inviting all of you, wherever you live or work, to make that shift in your thinking. So after all, instead of Berlin building sewers decades after London, or Amsterdam connecting its last house to the sewage network in the late 80s, all the work that we do in stabilizing and sustaining open source benefits all of us right now together. Yeah. So now open for questions. You're also welcome to get in touch with me this way. There's a microphone here in the middle. I would ask you to keep your question a question and relatively short. Thank you. Is this what you, yeah, please go to the microphone if you can.
Thanks for your presentation. Are there any examples of how public funding can influence an open source project?
Can you maybe, what do you mean by influence? Or
Well, is it restricting, or is it if someone does it in a free time, time is limited, right? That might be pushing efficient, low-code solutions, where if you supply someone 3 years worth of money, they might go overboard, and now it's not that nice little library anymore.
Thank you for the question. So in general, when we at the Sovereign Tech Agency, we work through a few different programs. But for example, with the Sovereign Tech Fund, we commission work using public procurement on open source projects, and we develop together with them. So we co-create a list or a set of milestones, of work packages, of deliverables that will be accomplished. And those, our interest is generally in maintenance and security updates and things that are not so easy to find private money to finance. And so when we do that, we also think about like what will happen when the investment ends, when the work that we've commissioned is over. And I'd say what we try to build into those is something that will change sort of the nature of the community, or give them new skills or things, new processes that will, let's say if it's developer experience or documentation or just like a better working environment. So in general, we try not to structure things so that they become dependent on public money, because it's of course not unending, and all of these things have a finite term. And also for things like the Sovereign Tech Fellowship, where we have identified for 1 year 6 different open source maintainers. That's another way for people to sort of demonstrate impact, or to do the kind of work that is really hard to get public funding, or to get other kinds of funding for. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have answered your question.
Yes, completely.
Yeah? Okay,
thank you.
Great. Sure. Thank you.
To go with your sewers analogy, to liken maintenance of open source software to like janitorial work. One thing I love, personally, I love about janitorial trash collectors is they get to go on strike. What are your thoughts around like how we compensate, how we allow for that kind of janitorial like action in open source? Do you think it could be beneficial?
So to the janitorial aspect, that's actually an analogy we use a lot. Custodial work, it's things, maintenance work. I actually love the gardener concept also. So to say that there's a lot of things that you really need to do over and over again or in different ways, and it's not necessarily, you'll be doing some kind of weeding, but you don't know where exactly. Or you know that you're going to need to be picking up trash, or you'll need to be repainting certain areas, but it's not the kind of thing that you could put into a, next year I'm going to change these 3 light bulbs in these 3 sections. So I think that's really important in terms of thinking about open source and digital infrastructures having these kinds of needs. And for sure, that's really important. The labor aspect, I am super interested in, but I think we're not, we have many steps to go before I think we get there. So, but I think it's important to consider the labor of people doing this work at the moment. It's often very much in their free time or as volunteers or partially compensated. And we're trying to, that's also part of the longevity and the sustainability of open source communities and open source work in general is there an economic path that people can foresee and can imagine themselves doing, not just next year, but maybe in 10 or 50. And it doesn't always have to be in the same project or even in the same community, but is there a viable career path? So, yeah. Thank you for the question.
Hi, I'm Danny. What about the risk of political agendas if you are governing and the open source too much? So if you let open source being funded by the government, isn't open source one of the nicest things that a lot of collective people with all different minds? So what about too much public and political interest and agendas to some projects?
Yeah, thank you. Denny, right? Appreciate the question. And we definitely also can think and worry about this. We as the Sovereign Tech Agency are fairly able to operate I don't know if it's the right word, but technocratically or independently. So we try to decide based on criteria that we've developed and try to be pretty transparent about how those decisions are made. To be sort of a buffer between, we're not really doing, we're not picking winners, as I think someone said earlier today. Like, what I really like about our work at the Sovereign Tech Agency and with the Sovereign Tech Fund is that we really look at technologies, at open source projects that exist already and are already used, where if they didn't exist, the risk would be much bigger for society, for industry, for private sector and public sector. It is certainly a concern, but I think at the moment, I would say getting any money into this ecosystem and having public sector and governments recognize the need for their intervention is the biggest hurdle that we have at the moment. But we're also very careful about that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello. I would like to know, what is your idea how to educate the governments that there is open source and that they need it? Because in the moment I see a lot of lawyers and they say, okay, we make a contract with a company, then it's clear who is responsible and we will kill them if they don't follow. And it does not happen any. And in the open source world, you have some responsible. You have to select something and you must have an idea what you want. And believe me, in these governments, they most times have only a keyword and no idea what it means.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry, can you say the last part again? Yeah.
How do you get the experience back in the government so they know what they want? In the moment, you have lawyers who follow some code and they have no idea what they are doing, basically.
Yeah. Well, we're lucky, and actually 2 of them, I won't point them out exactly, but 2 of them are in the room right now. We have people who are technologists on our team, so who have worked with many different technologies and who have the expertise, and we work really hard to bring that into our organization. It's not something, you're right, it's hard to hire that. It's also hard to hire people into the sort of public sector or public affiliated sector for that kind of work, but we really need those, and we have people not only there but also in our Sovereign Tech Fund team, the people who work on the programs with technical expertise who are able to engage with the open source communities and to make decisions about which technologies are critical and which technologies are something that we need to invest in the public interest. So I guess in the end, the answer is it's a hiring question, and we are doing, I think, a pretty good job of getting those people into the organization, and also building a network of affiliated experts who are also able to advise, because there's no way a single team can, cover the whole technological stack of the entire of all of society. Thank you for your question.
I just want to say I'm so tempted to go off and make a pun about this, but I will not. So you gave a great presentation, but I think that the interesting thing is that Waterworks has learned about procurement, and procurement has been critical to go off and structure how that has happened. Procurement sets it creates the incentives by which other people, with which the environment works. Are there things from the Waterworks procurement process that you have stumbled upon that could potentially help inform us about how we can better buy these goods and services in a transition? Like, is there, like, this wasn't something that governments necessarily knew how to do 100 years ago. How did they learn how to do this in a way that allowed us to reliably drink water and flush the toilet?
It's a really good question. I think, honestly, history has kind of erased all the complicated corruption that probably existed in the development of waterworks and public sewage systems. I was not able to research so deeply into the situation, but I think, a lot of the Dutch contingent just left because some of them were nodding when I was talking about the reform of the public sector of Dutch water systems. But things like that, where you say, okay, some of this we can outsource, some of this, I think it was in Berlin, or maybe it was somewhere else where I was researching. The police actually paid for some of the initial sewage system, because it was a public health problem, and that somehow was the police commissioner was somehow able to release some funds for that. So I think maybe what I'm just saying is I think we have to all be quite creative, and I think that's a little bit of what we're trying to do. And we don't have all the answers, but we're definitely collected a lot of experience at the Sovereign Tech Agency in procuring that. And yeah. If anyone else, I can't believe I'm saying this, but if you have procurement tips, you're welcome to talk to me. Please.
Hey, I'm Sabina.
Hi.
I'd like to understand a bit better how the fund works.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're talking about public procurement and at the same time investment, and
Mm-hmm.
somehow I don't fully understand how these two things work. If the German ministry or German country is actual investor, maintaining shares or keeping shares of infrastructure projects, and if not, why not?
Well, thank you. You've put your finger on interesting vocabulary questions. So we use the term invest because we actually use public procurement to pay for things. So it's all service. In the grand scheme of things, it's service contracts. So just like the government might pay for someone to build a road or to maintain train tracks. So we don't take shares in sort of the VC mode, also because it's open source. So you can't really have necessarily shares of something that is open for everyone or available and released for everyone to use. But we use investment because the term, for example, people talk about investing in the train system in Germany all the time, or investing in roads, or investing in education. And of course, there's not a equity model there, but there is a model of this is something that we're spending money on because we've decided that it is important. So I hope that clarifies a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for the talk and the provocative title. In the first examples you were giving, the individual maintainers of these kind of important projects who we're very lucky to have. If I think about projects or organizations that have maybe moved beyond that, it would be like the C++ working group, W3C, the Linux Foundation. Do you see those as a better model where they're kind of a mixture of, public-private funding and industry organization to a certain extent? Is that an improvement, or do you think it still, maybe has a lot of problems when you're talking about this really long-term investment to build out these kind of core building blocks that the rest of the industry benefits from?
So I would say I think we're in a phase still of experimentation, of trying different models. And I would never, or we would at the Sovereign Tech Agency, for example, would never try to dictate, you need to organize yourselves like this, because we know that communities are unique and they have different structures, and sometimes their fiscal structures are also unique or separate from the communities themselves. I think our focus, or my personal focus, as I understand the scope of this problem, is it needs to fit for the person, and it needs to, like, does it make sense for a single maintainer project or a smaller library that doesn't need that much maintenance to be part of the Linux Foundation? What I think our interest is in making sure that those people get compensated for their work and that they can continue to do it under good circumstances and maybe find successors or build communities around it, and whether that can happen within let's say software foundations or within companies even. I think like the private sector also has an important role to play in also securing their value chain. If they're depending on particular libraries or particular software components, they can also think about, bringing, I'm not literally suggesting this, but they could pay those people or they could hire them. I mean, we've seen this happen. Like we see some of the bigger companies also bringing people in-house in order to support, particular open source ecosystems. So I think the medium-sized answer is it's complicated. And if you found something that really works, I think we'd love to hear about it, because one thing I've learned in the last year is that a lot of these open source communities don't talk to each other. They're all suffering from the same problems and challenges, and there's a lot to learn from each other. So yeah, thanks for the question. And if that's it, then I would thank you all so much for coming and for listening to my provocative analogies, and hope you learned a little bit about looking at infrastructure, and that the next time when you turn on the faucet or take a shower, that you'll think of digital infrastructure and maybe me. So.